Welcome back to Northwest City Politics in the Know with Bonita. We're glad that you're joining us again this week. We're happy to have people like you, people that are interested in what's happening in our cities and following the issues. If you haven't watched our show before, each week we'll have somebody on from one of the 9 cities in CCX viewing area, and bringing people to let you know what are the current issues, what's happened and what will be happening in the cities. And then from time to time, we'll bring groups in that affect all of our cities, which is what we're going to do tonight, because I'm very happy to welcome as a guest tonight Representative Mike Freiberg. He's with District 45B.
Yep. Thanks, Juanita. It's great to be back on your show.
Yeah, you've been on our show before.
Mm-hmm.
You know that I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself out to our wider audience.
Sure.
And you might tell people, what area does 45B cover?
Well, sure. Once again, I'm Mike Freiberg. I'm the state representative for District 45B. District 45B includes all or parts of the cities of Crystal, Golden Valley, New Hope, and Robbinsdale. So basically the northern half of Golden Valley, where I live, southern half of Crystal, a little bit of southern New Hope, and all of the city of Robbinsdale.
Right.
Yeah, and so you just wanted some background information?
Yeah, no background, because people that aren't in those cities might not know you as well.
Sure. No, glad to talk. So while I grew up in this area, my parents moved to Golden Valley when I was 6 weeks old. So I went to schools in the area and everything. I am married. I've been married for almost 10 years. I have 2 kids, aged 4 and 7. They're in the Robbinsdale, the oldest anyways, in the Robbinsdale schools. Right now, the youngest, who's 4 years old, will be. I spent 9 years on the Golden Valley City Council, which was a great opportunity. I loved serving the city I grew up in. When I'm not in the legislature, I work as a public health attorney, work on public health policy in other states. I've been doing that for a little over 10 years, and I've been the representative for this area for 4 years. I was first elected in 2012.
Now, an important issue that didn't get resolved last year is transportation. So, do you think that dealing with the transportation issues what do you think will come up in that regard in this legislative session?
Yeah, well, I think, as you said, it didn't get passed in the last session, even though I think there was a recognition that it was one of the most important issues facing the state, and there's a shortfall to make sure we have a system of roads, bridges, and transit that serves the whole state. So, and this is a budget year too, so you know, the Department of Transportation has a budget that'll come up this year, so at the very least that'll be, I'm sure, part of the discussion, because if we don't pass a budget for the Department of Transportation, there could be
do anything,
yeah, there could be a government shutdown again. So I think at the very least that'll come up. I'm hopeful there will be discussion about a more comprehensive transportation funding package that includes funding for transit, because that's, I think, a very important issue in our part of the state too, and our part of the metro. Yeah,
so what were some of the differences in approaches between the Democrats and the Republicans in the issue of transportation?
Yeah, I would say the two main differences involved the modes of transportation that were being funded, and the funding source would be the other one. So as far as the modes of transportation, the Republicans seem to hammer this message of roads and bridges and not much else. Whereas Democrats, and certainly myself included, felt like there should be funding in there for transit projects as well. I mean, in our area in the northwest suburbs, the Blue Line extension, the Bottineau line, is certainly an important issue. I think, you know, a big hang-up last year was the Southwest light rail line, and actually I think that was largely responsible for the fact that there was no funding bill. Because I think members of the majority party in the House certainly were very opposed to that. And it's hard for me to know whether that funding that opposition is to all forms of light rail transit, or whether it was just specific to the Southwest line. So hopefully it was just to the Southwest line. The governor was able to sort of piece together some funding for that proposal through other means, so I'm hopeful that Bottineau will be part of the discussion this year, and that it won't generate the same level of opposition that the Southwest line seemed to do last year. But I guess it remains
Yeah,
to be
you don't
seen.
know, right, till it gets going.
And the other point of difference is how it's funded. So whether there's a gas tax or not. I guess what remains to be seen, just the best way to fund it.
Right.
Whether some sort of tax on vehicles or so anyway, that was.
So what would you like to see come up in the area of transportation, you personally?
Well,
and from what you've heard from your constituents.
Sure. Well, I think the funding stream needs to be sustainable.
Okay.
I'm open to different options for that. And I'd like to see that the metro area, the northwest suburbs, are funded comparably to other areas, and specifically, I'd like to see funding for the Blue Line extension for Bottineau. I'm really hopeful we're able to do that for our area, because I think it would be a huge benefit.
Oh, I agree. Do you hear anything specifically from citizens on transit issues, things that people have lobbied you about?
Yeah, certainly, the light rail is certainly, not everybody is supportive of it. There are some people who have some concerns with it, but I'd say on the whole, from, a majority of the people I hear from are, I know the cities that are affected by it in my area, that's primarily Golden Valley, Robbinsdale, and Crystal, have raised specific issues dealing with stops that'll occur in their city. I know in Crystal, the issue of pedestrian safety at Bass Lake Road and 81 has come up, and trying to make sure that there's safety considerations there for the pedestrians there. The city supports a pedestrian bridge. I can kind of see where they're coming from on that. So, hopefully that's something that we can get resolved in a way that everyone will be agreeable to.
Now, during the legislative session, there was a need for balance between the metropolitan area and then the outstate rural area. Was part of the division, I think, in terms of differences of opinion. Maybe you can talk to about that issue.
Sure. Certainly there's rhetoric about that. I don't know that the rhetoric always matches up with the reality, though. I don't know. I did bring this is where I have a visual aid here, a map. So this is a map just showing kind of which parts of the state receive more money from state transportation funding, and which parts of the state actually contribute more money than they receive. So generally speaking, the red areas, it's listed here as a Donny County in those areas. So the darker red ones receive quite a bit of state transportation funding in excess of what that county contributes to it. So, and then the darker blue ones are kind of the flip side. They contribute more than they receive. So there are some kind of outlying blue counties in greater Minnesota, but generally speaking, the metro area contributes a great deal more to the state transportation funding than it receives, and greater Minnesota receives more than they contribute. And I'm not specifically trying to change that or anything. Just only wanted to show it just to raise the point that the rhetoric about
isn't always accurate.
Isn't always accurate, because I do feel like transportation is certainly an area where greater Minnesota does fairly well. And they have needs in that part of the state certainly as well. So I just thought that was worth mentioning.
Right. Yeah. So we'll hope for the best in transportation, right?
Yes.
All right, the next issue we'll talk about is education, because I know that's one that's close to your heart, right? That you're concerned about. Education sometimes takes a major part in the session and sometimes not as great a part. What do you see for education in this up and coming session?
Again, it's hard for me being in the minority party. I don't know certainly what the majority party, where their focus in the education area will be. Certainly, in a budget, it's a budget year, so there'll have to be some discussion of it, and we do have money on the bottom line. So hopefully we won't be looking at any cuts or anything. I have spoken to some school board members though, who once in the Robbinsdale district where I live, and and they're planning, once after the election results came in, they decided to just plan for some more cuts, just out of concern for the state portion of their funding. And I found that, I have as a parent, in the Robbinsdale School District, I found that a little troubling. So I'm certainly hopeful that we can. That there won't, that they won't have to worry about that. So I know certainly it'll be a priority of the governor, making sure the schools are adequately funded. I still think one of the best things we've done since I've been in the legislature is create all-day kindergarten.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that happened my first year there, and I was able to take advantage of it with my daughter just last year. She's in first grade now, so so she was in all-day kindergarten last year, and it was at Neal, and it was great. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was across the whole state for school districts that wanted to be part of it.
Yeah, well, it's well, every school district was given.
They all picked to do it, right?
Yeah. It's the school districts have to offer it to everybody. It's optional for the parents.
Right.
So they don't have to send their kids to all-day kindergarten if they don't want to. But when it's an option, something like 99% of parents end up doing it.
Right.
So, yeah.
So what are some of the important education issues that you'd like to see moving forward? And sometimes it takes more than 1 year, right?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Well, as I said, just making sure the schools are adequately funded, I think is going to be kind of the overarching goal within, but then there are some additional issues. I know in the Robbinsdale district, one issue that's of concern is the whole issue of equalization. So of the metro area districts, the Robbinsdale district has kind of a smaller tax base. So, to do a comparable amount of spending to some of the other districts in the metro area, it's a greater impact on the taxpayers in the district. So, the state has this process of equalization formulas. Which is pretty complicated, but it hasn't really kept up with with changes over the last 20 years or so.
So it probably needs some work.
Yeah, so being able to kind of equalize the Robbinsdale district and other districts that don't have as much of a property tax base with some of the other ones in the metro area, I think would be something I'd like to see happen.
Well, that would be something where rural legislators and suburban ones might want to get together, right?
It seems like it might be an area where we could. Yeah, I would certainly hope so. I think early childhood education is going to continue to be another issue. I know it's certainly a priority of the governor, and so I'm sure it'll be a topic for discussion. And the discussion will revolve around how is it implemented? The governor would like to see universal pre-K for 4-year-olds based out of the schools, but the system we currently have is early childhood scholarships that can be used in not just in school-based early childhood programs, but also other centers as well. And I know there's more demand for that than there is capacity, so it's possible that program could be expanded too. So I guess it'll have to wait and see how it all shapes up at the legislature.
Now, an issue dealing with education, but at the other end of the line, is the college expenses and how they are being a burden, and that was from the federal level on down, right? Do you think anything will happen in the state level with that?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I'm 40 years old and I'm still paying off college loans from undergraduate years. So, last year I know there was discussion around tax credits for tuition expenses. So I think that's something that'll probably be looked at. I think it's a good idea. And just keeping tuition, I would hope, frozen at our public colleges and universities and community colleges in Minnesota is something I'd really like to see happen, just because I think the tuition at, whether it's the University of Minnesota or the MnSCU, I guess it's not called MnSCU anymore, but at the state colleges, just the tuition's raised at a level way beyond the ability of many of the students to absorb it. So just reversing that trend, I think, will be very important.
And then how likely do you think, you referenced the 4-year-old program, how likely do you think that will move forward in this year? Or is that going to be one that's going to take more years to
Yeah,
work its way through? Or
yeah, that could be just with given the election results.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, that is, like I said, it's a priority of the governor,
Right.
but I don't anticipate it'll be a priority of the current House leadership or the new Senate leadership as well. It'll be tough in this environment. I know some of the school districts have raised concerns about it too, as far as space and all of that, and I certainly hear their concerns. I do think if that's something that is going to be implemented, and schools need the funding to, whether it's to somehow expand the space to provide those services, or just to fund teachers who are able to do it. I don't know what the likelihood that a universal program for 4-year-olds is in this environment, but I certainly think something like consider discussion of the scholarships that I mentioned could be in order.
well, and because that relates to the issue of the achievement gap.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
One of
And
the
that's a big issue that people talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, one of the most surefire ways to help, bring the achievement gap under control is by investing in early childhood education. I think, the fact that we have all-day kindergarten now will help lessen it. I think the more we can provide early education to people to children as an option, I think that will help reduce the achievement gap as well.
Now, well, let's move to the issue of a tax bill, because last year the governor vetoed the bill, and we talked a little bit about why. But some of the things that the vetoed bill included were tax cuts for families contributing to savings plans, reductions in property taxes for farmers, and student loan credits. Do you think all of these are going to come back up again, and are there other tax issues that you think will be part of this session?
Yeah, well, I'm sure there'll be a huge discussion about taxes. There was quite a bit of good stuff in that tax bill, as you mentioned. There was also some stuff that didn't get that wasn't great, didn't get quite as much discussion. There were tax breaks for tobacco companies in there, which I certainly wasn't a fan of. There was a tax break for Super Bowl tickets, which just seemed like kind of an unnecessary use of state resources to me as well. And of course the $100 million, the error that was in there, it was just the substitution of the word "and" for the word "or" that led to that. So so I think the veto was understandable. I suspect a lot of these things will be up for discussion this year as well. I guess it remains to be seen exactly where the focus will be. I certainly hope any tax cuts that are provided are targeted towards lower and middle income people, because I don't think the most wealthy people really need tax breaks at this point, or I certainly don't think tobacco companies need tax breaks.
So do you think it's, in terms of how hard or how easy it is to reach agreement on a tax bill this year, will it be any different? Because you did reach agreement, but it had the errors. What will the process be like this year, do you think?
It's hard for me to say. I mean, it's the budget year now too, so that all the budget issues will be hanging over the state. The governor will still have a fair amount of say over this, and there isn't a veto-proof majority even in the House and the Senate. The Republican majority is by one seat, so it'll be, there'll, especially in the Senate, I think there'll be a lot of these issues will be up for discussion. So I'm sure it'll be a focus in the House. Like I said, I hope it'll be targeted towards middle and lower income people, but we'll have to see what happens, because a lot of it's going to ride on the governor's veto pen too. So
well, and then the surplus is going to enter into here too, on what the different groups want to do with the surplus.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So because that could all get eaten up by tax cuts, if it goes towards the wealthy or what have you. And I'm sure if there were bills passed to do that, the governor would not probably look favorably on it based on what he said and his past actions.
So what would you personally want to see in the tax bill? What are you looking towards?
Yeah, well, I'd like, just kind of on the broad scale, like I mentioned, I'd like to see the tax cuts targeted towards the middle class, towards poorer people, just who I think need it the most, especially in this economy. There's just huge wage inequalities, income inequalities. And so I think any bit we can help, to help people in the lower half of that spectrum, I think would be really good. One issue, just one smaller tax issue I'll be working on a bit this year. I've been working on it a little bit the past few years just because of my past local government experience, relates to sales tax exemptions for local governments. So we passed in 2013, we passed a sales tax exemption for local governments. Because of a Department of Revenue interpretation, it was held it didn't apply to joint powers organizations. The cities of Crystal and New Hope have a joint fire department. So, if they bought a fire hose, because they were a joint city fire department, they didn't get the sales tax exemption, whereas a city like Golden Valley that has its own fire department would. So we were able to pass to apply that sales tax exemption in 2015 to joint powers organizations. But now this year the discussion's about construction materials. So I'll be carrying a bill to provide a sales tax exemption to local governments on construction materials. Yeah. So that's just one small thing I'd like to see. I'd be involved in as part of a tax bill.
Okay, then moving back, we have referenced the budget, but it will definitely be a major debate and coming to some agreement on the budget. The surplus avoids a fight over major cuts, but the presidential election creates some uncertainties in what's going to happen from the federal level. So what would you like to see happen as they develop the budget?
Yeah, certainly funding for schools. I think should be a top priority. Just making sure we're keeping our schools whole, and funding for transportation. Like I mentioned, will be a big discussion point, and making sure it's treats the different parts of the state equitably and funds transit as well as roads and bridges. Bonding bill, I think is something I'd really like to see happen.
Oh, right. Are there any local groups needing bonding that you're aware of at this point?
Yeah, we've talked about. I've met with the city of Golden Valley. I think their top bonding priority relates to the intersection at Douglas Drive and Highway 55. They're interested in an underpass going there, just because it's an unsafe pedestrian crossing. I've crossed it myself and can attest to that. I haven't heard as much about specific bonding projects from the other cities. Last session there was. There's flooding kind of where the cities of Crystal, Golden Valley, and New Hope all come together. It's
Medicine Lake Road and Winnetka,
right? Exactly, DeCola Ponds area. But I think they might be looking at funding directly from the DNR this year rather than through a bonding bill. But it's possible that could come up again too in a bonding discussion.
So there's always local groups that you help move along in terms of getting them included in the bonding.
And certainly if any local officials or anybody else is interested in that, it's an area the suburbs don't always do as well in bonding bills as certainly as I think if you did a map of of the whole state, it would look similar to that transportation map we looked at before. Greater Minnesota typically does pretty well in bonding bills, so I'm always interested in making sure suburban areas like ours are taken into account as well.
Well, and from last summer and on, the increases in health insurance rates for the MNsure people that have to buy their own policies ended up being a major issue. I know the governor is looking and trying to get a special session set up in terms of providing some help. Maybe you can talk a little bit to that issue, your thoughts about it and where that might move and how
Sure. No, I think that'll be a huge topic of discussion. The governor's already come out, well, he had a proposal, before that
Right.
I was hoping we could get it done as part of a special session, because that is an issue that some Minnesotans are feeling very acutely. And I think it does seem like it'll be a priority of the House majority as well. I've heard rumors that we might actually discuss it tomorrow on the House floor.
Oh, okay.
So I'm still not sure if that's going to happen or not. But we'll see about that. So I imagine there will be a discussion about, how it's funded, what the funding, who it's targeted to, how it's funded, how they receive the funding. The governor's proposed a rebate proposal for people below a certain income threshold who have costs in excess of a certain amount because of the insurance increases that their private insurers have had. So, that'll be, I was hoping that issue could have been resolved in a special session, but they weren't able to come to agreement on the best way to do that. So it's an issue that I'm certain will be discussed quite a bit in this upcoming session.
Well, and that's part of it, but isn't there some concern about doing overall work on health, the area of health insurance at the state level?
I'm sure the House majority will discuss, the MNsure program, that not everything there has been perfectly smoothly gone smoothly, certainly.
Right.
Some of these issues, though, are the health insurance increases are they're private insurance companies, so whether or not they're sold through the MNsure marketplace. So the costs, the costs of insurance, if there are ways we can address that, or address the costs of medical care generally, or prescription drugs or what have you, I think is something we need to look at.
Yeah, because there's a lot of needs and a lot of different ways to approach them, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, do you think there'll be anything coming up in terms of the environmental issues and water, which was kind of a contentious issue last year? Do you think that'll come up again, or?
It's certainly possible. I hope so. I was a little disappointed with some of the actions taken in the environmental area in the last term. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency had this citizen advisory board, and that one of the things that passed kind of at the last minute just got rid of that altogether.
Right.
And I was not supportive of that, and so. I'm hopeful we can actually pass some things that are good for the environment, because it's an area where there's a lot of concern. I know having clean water is an issue that's important to the governor. We hear about places like Flint, Michigan.
Right.
So I certainly hope we can, move forward and not backward this year, because I feel like we took a couple steps backward last year.
I want to thank you so much for taking time at the beginning of a very busy schedule.
Oh, my pleasure.
And helping people out there think about some of the issues that are going to be coming up in the legislature. And we will encourage you to be sure, if you've got a particular concern about an area that you think needs changing at a state level, contact your legislator. And we're glad that you've been with us, and join us again next week. Bye.